Hello, everyone. In this last part of chapter one, we're going to be looking at um, the concept of how science is a form of testable um, hypotheses. So the word science is derived from Latin and it means to know. So science is the study of anything in the natural universe. To understand and to know about it is science. Inquiry is the search for information and explanations of natural phenomena. So scientists use the process of inquiry that includes making observations and forming hypotheses and testing them. So one of the key starts of science, key beginnings of the scientific process is observation. So biology is one of those disciplines where a lot of times asking questions or forming questions comes from the observation of the natural world. So biology in many cases begins with careful observation. And then these observations can reveal valuable information about the natural world. And so biologists, we rely heavily on the published contributions of other scientists in our fields around the world, and then build upon that existing knowledge that everyone has learned. So, and in identifying reputable sources and publications is easier than in the past, thanks to the ability of technology and being able to search for information, not just in a single language, but in the around the world. When you're gathering information from your observations, we call that data. So recorded observations are called data. And data can be in two different forms. It can be qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative data is in a form that requires a description. For example, the color of something. If you were to describe to me the color of the sky, um, those words, that ability to describe it is a qualitative data point. Now, the other form of data, probably the easiest to wrap your head around, is a quantitative data, where it's expressed usually as a number. It's something that's numerical, it's something that's measured, and it's something that is has to be recorded and organized. We like to show quantitative data as tables or graphs to help visually understand the information. But those are the two forms of data collection. So this here is the famous biologist Jane Goodall, and Jane Goodall is known worldwide for her studies of the great apes. And here, she's observing some chimpanzees. So she would record her observations of the chimpanzee behavior, and this is a famous and a very practical way of obtaining data. And this is a form of qualitative data. So her descriptions of the chimpanzee behavior is a form of qualitative data. And so you can use inductive reasoning, which derives generalizations from a large number of observations. And so those careful observations and the analysis of the data, along with the generalizations that are reached by induction, are fundamental to our understanding of nature. So the large amount of data that Jane Goodall has collected over the decades of her career, um, she can derive generalizations from that large data set. And so she uses inductive reasoning to create hypotheses. so that they are able to observe and study the behavior of the great apes. So forming and testing hypotheses is the next step in the scientific process. The first one is usually making an observation. So in science, a hypothesis is an explanation based on observations and assumptions. And that explanation has to be testable. It leads to a testable prediction. It must lead to predictions that can be tested by making additional observations or by performing an experiment. And an experiment is a scientific test. It's carried out under controlled, very specific conditions. So you can't just make a hypothesis and it can't be a testable um, hypothesis and actually be any use to science. It has to be something that is testable. It has to be a hypothesis that is able to be analyzed um, by experimentation or observation. So let's do an example. Observation. You come home and you notice that your desk lamp doesn't work. So you ask the question, why is my lamp not working, right? So you form instantly some hypotheses. One, maybe the bulb's burned out, or two, maybe the bulb's not screwed in properly. Or you can have more hypotheses. Maybe the lamp doesn't work anymore. Maybe there's no electricity coming to the lamp. But you can ask all these questions as hypotheses, and guess what? All of them are testable. But in this example, if we start with our observation that the lamp doesn't work, and we ask the question, why doesn't the lamp work? We can have our hypotheses, right? And we can have a prediction and a test of the prediction and get results from our experiment. So if the bulb is burnt out, the prediction is if we replace the light bulb, it will fix the problem. And so the test of the prediction, the experiment, is that you replace the light bulb. The results of that experiment is that the lamp works. So that means that your hypothesis was correct. It's supported. The other hypothesis or potential hypothesis is that the bulb's not properly screwed in. So a prediction is, okay, now I can just reinstall the bulb. I can retighten the bulb. The test of the prediction, the experiment, is, okay, you reinstall the bulb. The result is that the lamp doesn't work. So your hypothesis is incorrect, that the bulb is not improperly screwed in. So you have to, if hypothesis number 2 was your first experiment, then what scientists will do is that they will go back and test another hypothesis, which hopefully would be the first hypothesis that the bulb is burnt out, and then they would try it that way. What I want you guys to understand is that this seems like a simple experiment, and it's because it is. Most of the things that we do in our day-to-day lives and our instinctually, we create hypotheses for problems in our head and we test them all the time. Some people are better at it than others, but as humans, we do this all the time. And that leads to deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning uses general premises to make specific predictions. You make predictions about what could happen. So initial observations may give rise to multiple hypotheses, right? This is different from inductive reasoning, where inductive reasoning, you use a lot of data and a lot of observations to explain uh, something, to explain for example, with the chimpanzee, to explain a behavior, where deductive reasoning is using the information that is presented to you to create many predictions, to have a idea of what could happen. So we can never prove that a hypothesis is true, but testing it in many ways with different sorts of data can significantly increase our confidence in it. So Um, we can't just say that something is true. We have to test it out. There are some questions that can and cannot be answered by science. Hypotheses that are testable can be answered by science. But if it's not testable, cannot be answered by science. For example, a hypothesis that goes forward with the desk lamp cannot be tested. We currently do not have any means of testing the supernatural. So, supernatural and religious explanations are outside the bounds of science. Um, it's one of the reasons why they say, religion is based on faith. It's based on the belief in something that is beyond the natural and observable universe. So the scientific process is very flexible. When you're first taught the scientific method, step one, make a hypothesis. Step two, or make an observation, make a hypothesis. You test that hypothesis. You do an experiment, you get some results, and you form a conclusion. However, in the real world, right, it's very flexible. You do not have to start at the very beginning. You can actually start at the very end. A lot of times in science, things are discovered accidentally. Nothing very, a lot of science does follow the scientific method. A lot of questions are proposed, and then the experimentation process takes over and it follows the scientific method. But there's many cases where it does not, and you can start at any point in the scientific method. You can backtrack, and then you can go forward as well. Right. And in some cases, observations may be too puzzling to prompt well-defined questions until further studies are complete. Until someone has a breakthrough, so a lot of things may stay in mystery until there is a broader explanation. So, forming and testing hypotheses can have its roots in many different things. It can be for exploration and discovery. It can just be, traditional science was exploration and discovery. You would travel to a new part of the world and you would explore and discover something new. Um, but that's not the only way that science uh, happens. It can be from societal benefits and outcomes. The need to, for example, clean the environment, the need to create new drugs to solve some sort of health problem. Those are for societal benefits. And so the need for betterment of society can lead to scientific discovery. And then there's also the community and feedback. So you may do a research project, you may research, say, this new drug, and you turns around and you release your data to the community, the scientific community, and the scientists review it and say, well, you know what? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you look at how it affects this group of people, or how it affects this health problem? And you get feedback from your peers. This is the process of having science journals that are peer reviewed. And a lot of times, these peers, the community, will give you feedback and ask new questions that can lead to new scientific experiments. So there are many different ways to form and test hypotheses. We're going to skip this test study of the mice, and we're going to jump into variables and controls in experiments. So what is a controlled experiment? In a controlled experiment, you have a group, an experimental group, um, that is compared to a control group. So it means that one group of individuals did not receive the experimental treatment, and then the control group is the group that doesn't receive anything at all. Experimental variables are features or quantities that vary in an experiment. There's the independent variable and the dependent variable. The independent variable is the one that is usually manipulated by the researchers. It's independent of what's being observed. So, for example, if we're talking about the ability to grow plants, like how much fertilizer should you give a group of plants to see what's better for their growth? The independent variable will be things that are not being measured, it's what's being manipulated by the researcher. Where the dependent variable is the one that is predicted to be affected by the response of the independent variables. So, for example, in this, the plants, we're testing out plants and their growth in fertilizer. The plants themselves, the growth of the plants would be the dependent variable because the plants are dependent upon the fertilizer. And all the independent variables would be all the other things that are controlled or manipulated by the researcher, which in this case would be the amount of fertilizer, or maybe the amount of water, or maybe the amount of sunlight. And if it's not being manipulated by the researcher, then we would consider them controlled variables because we'd want them to be controlled and to be the same for all individuals. Now, in science, once you have done the scientific method and made observations and you have repeated these, and you find that there is a process to be true across a wide breadth of scientific experiments, that is known as a theory. So a theory is broader in scope than a hypothesis. It's general enough to lead to many new testable hypotheses, and it's supported by a large body of evidence in comparison to a hypothesis. Now, the word theory can be used incorrectly a lot. A theory, a lot of in the general term theory, we use it to state that that is something that may be true, but in the scientific form of theory, uh, a theory is as something to the truth as you can get. Um, so the theory of evolution is supported by a wide breadth of scientific research and observations that it is true in all sense of observation that we have seen. So a theory is as close to the truth as you can get in science. So science benefits from a cooperative approach and diverse viewpoints. Most scientists work in teams, which are often undergraduate and graduate students. It relies upon communication and publication of your research. And research papers are usually vetted by your community, by the peer review process. And so, because of that peer review process, scientists can check each other's claims. Scientists can check to see, okay, just like with any scientific method, it must be repeatable. So if you claim that this new drug is going to be able to cure cancer, it must be repeatable. You must be able to test to see if that person is correct. Um, it is not unusual for different scientists to work on the same research question because you want to, sometimes it's not just about discovering something new, it's to discover if something is actually true or can be modified to be even better. So because of this, scientists will usually cooperate by sharing data about something that is a model organism. Um, for for at least for animals, one of the common model organisms is the fruit fly, Drosophila. Um, one of the common model organisms for plants is the Arabidopsis plant, which is a very small, unsuspecting plant. It's a very not just like the fruit fly. There are several other popular model organisms, and so biologists approach interesting questions from different angles using the model organisms, and they're able to do experimentations on these model organisms and share with their fellow researchers um, their results and get help if they need it. One of the benefits of science and one of the catch-22s of science is technology and society. So the goal of science is to understand the natural phenomena that encase our world. The goal of technology is to apply scientific knowledge for some specific purpose. So science and technology are interdependent. New science can create new technology, and new technology can lead to the ability to answer new questions in science. For example, the discovery of the microscope, this new technology, allowed for the discovery of the microscopic world, which is arguably bigger than the macroscopic world. So new technology, new science, they're interdependent of each other. The combination of science and technology can have dramatic effects on society. For example, the discovery of DNA by Watson and Crick allowed for advances in DNA technology, which now leads to us understanding heredity and how things are controlled at the genetic level. And so a lot of times it will lead to ethical questions about um, should we do it versus can we do it? And so ethical issues that arise from new technology can have as much to do with the politics, the economics, and even the culture as with science and technology. For example, the misunderstanding about stem cell technology led to it being banned in many parts of the world for a very long time, which delayed the scientific usage and of stem cells and the health benefits that developed from the research of stem cells. And so with that, guys, that finishes chapter 1 and the themes of biology. Um, Next time for chapter 2, we're going to start entering into the chemical side of biology.